The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the first chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the light was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify for the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or the will of the flesh, or the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh, and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. The Gospel of the Lord. So there is a common expression, keeping it real, and it usually means to separate all the illusion and all of the kind of patina that we so often throw over all the ways we think about things. So if you Google keeping it real, you come up with all kinds of funny memes. So there's the one where it says, this is how I think I look when I'm exercising, and this, person went, and this is how I really look, and this pathetic person saying, because that's how it really looks. There are things there where it says, this is how I think I look as a pastor on Christmas morning. Woo! This is how I really am. I should have taken the picture of my dog who was here with me the whole time last night. He was curled up in bed like this. This is how it really is. And it's important sometimes to remember how things really are so that we don't get caught up in the fantasies that sometimes we create in our own minds. And I've always thought about that kind of thing on Christmas morning because we read John's Gospel, the beginning of John's Gospel, and at first it sounds like we're kind of going back into some deep philosophical thing. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word is out there someplace, and then there's stuff about light and all this kind of stuff. And that sort of is the same thing as we can get into on Christmas Eve, where we kind of go back into this little fantasy world of silent nights and stars in the sky and angels singing beautifully in the heavens. And it almost sounds like a fairy tale. And we go back into that world and we think, this is the way maybe God really is, that it's out there someplace, and it's not really part of my real life. But we read John's Gospel, and we start in with this, it's the Word, and it's light, and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, John ends up doing something that no philosopher of the time would ever do. He ends and he says, the Word became flesh. The Word actually became a real, living person in our real, actual, everyday lives. It was John's way of saying, what God is doing in Jesus is not creating a nice, spiritual, silent night for you to think about once a year, but actually becoming real, making it real in our lives, in our real, everyday lives, right here and right now. That actually is what Christmas is all about. It's about God making it real for us in our actual, everyday lives, and helping us to be people who make God's love and God's presence known in the actual real lives of others as well. And I think that's a really, even though probably the John's Christmas story is not probably the favorite Christmas story. If you ask anybody what's their favorite Christmas story, they'll tell you the angels and the shepherds, and maybe they like the wise guys, coming up to visit Jesus and things like that. But one of the really great things about John's Gospel is that it reminds us to keep it real, to have real things going on in our lives, because if we don't, then our faith ends up being something that really ends up being kind of something out there that doesn't affect me right now. And I watch this a lot of times where people say to me, what is it, I ask people what does it mean to be a Christian? And people will tell me, well, it means that, somehow we've got this idea in our head, and as long as we know this thing about Jesus someplace, then someday, far from now, hopefully, we'll go off and our souls will go off and be with Jesus someplace in heaven. And it's not that that's not part of the promise, but that makes faith and our lives as Christians totally focused on someplace else at some other time. And what Jesus is doing in coming into the world is making God's love and God's presence not just about some other place at some other time, but about right here and right now. That's maybe the most important thing that we can remember at Christmas time. And in fact, there is really only hope for another time and another place, because God has made it real for us right here and right now. Because that is the God who cares about us right here and right now. That's the God who walks with us right here and right now. And that's the God who keeps it real for us, both now and in the future. Amen.